Welcome to the Business End of Agility podcast, hosted by New Zealand's Business Agility Meetup community. We're here to bring you real-world stories from innovative organisations and forward-thinking leaders around the globe. We're going to explore all facets of business agility, from adaptive leadership and evolving company cultures to emerging ways of working, processes and technologies. I'm your host for the session, Bianca, and thank you for joining us. Communication. It's just about emails, PowerPoint presentations, and the internet, right? Well, maybe it's a bit more. It's fundamental to solving core business challenges. And in this episode of the Business End of Agility, we delve deep into the art and science of effective communication with our expert guest, Eithne Sweeney. We'll be uncovering the reality of communicating in the modern workplace and how multiple sources of noise get in the way of the messages we're trying to send from being received. Eithne will share her experience in detecting miscommunication, identifying noise and reducing it, and we'll chat about driving better organisational impact by having the right key ingredients that turn everyday communication into a strategic tool. So, if you're a business professional who wants to unlock greater agility and efficiency within your organisation, this episode is for you. Eithne is a strong communicator and connector, and she believes that stronger connections are actually the key to a sustainable organisational culture that will drive stronger engagement, collaboration, and importantly, community. Originally from Ireland, Eithne spent over 5 years working for large multinationals in China. And there she helped technical teams bridge language, culture, and distance gaps. And since moving to New Zealand 20 years ago, she has worked with experts in technical and cross-functional teams, from technology and finance to engineering and science. And as a facilitator, trainer, coach, and a general geek whisperer, she gives smart people the skills, structures, and confidence to speak up and be heard. Welcome, Eithne, to the show today.
Thank you, Bianca. It's lovely to be here.
I was just thinking that in terms of being able to cut your teeth on communication skills, working across multinationals from a base in China across 5 years, that certainly is a way to be able to hone those skills. What were some of your highlights?
Talk about jumping in at the deep end. I think if I was ever going to learn, it was definitely in a setting like that. But also we often think with communication, it's native language conflicts that get in the way. So it was very interesting to be working through English, but working with people who had different native languages, and really getting to see what got in the way of communication. And more often than not, it wasn't their native languages, but many other things. So it was definitely a great starting experience.
I know there'll be some people listening that would be like, so what were some of the things that you found got in the way of that communication if it wasn't kind of language?
Well, I guess this is where I started my interest in communication and more importantly, more miscommunication, I think, Bianca, because we're all born with 2 ears, 1 mouth, and there's that saying, if we use them in the same proportion, then the world would be a better place.
I know that one well, yes.
So observing in a setting like that, very international setting in the 2000s, what often turned out to be the reason for miscommunication was people not having the same amount of knowledge, people communicating in different styles, people having too much workload to do, not enough time to actually send properly or receive properly. And it set me down the path of actually trying to understand, what is communication actually supposed to be all about. I remember going to a training course earlier in my career where they shared the simplest diagram you could ever use for communication, that there's a sender, there's a receiver, and the transmitter sends a message, the receiver receives it, and maybe they bounce it back or maybe they don't. And actually, like 2 tin cans with a piece of rope in between, that is as simple as communication is supposed to be. Unfortunately, what happens is that noise gets in the middle, and that's what leads us to miscommunication at home and in the workplace.
I know we're going to explore some of that, what just is noise. But I just want to ask you a question first. I mean, we're born with, our eyes and our ears and our fingers from a, online communication
Mm.
perspective, and we speak and make sounds from the time that we're born. How is it that we just don't naturally get better and better at communication? Obviously, we're practicing it all the time. What stops us from being sort of naturally effective communicators?
Well, I actually think when we're born, we are naturally effective. Like you think of newborn
Mm,
babies, they're looking and observing. They can't speak, but they can certainly make noise, so they can make themselves heard. And when something is the matter, they will make themselves heard with us. So actually, in a way, we are at our purest communication form as soon as we are born. And then it's over the years we know how to make noise and we know how to hear sound. We learn how to type with our fingers or write on paper, but a lot of assumptions is often what gets in the way, or sometimes social conditioning that affects how well we listen and how well we articulate our point. And to be honest, I mean, I don't know how it was for you, Bianca, but when I went to school, nobody actually taught me how to communicate. They taught me how to read and write and how to listen, or I guess we didn't have a choice to listen when the teachers were speaking. But while we did English, we did Shakespeare and novels. So we watched how other people communicated,
mm,
and learned how to repeat what we had learned. But more a verbal communication, unless maybe even if you did presentation skills, it's not really the everyday communication. We pick that up by osmosis, by life experience, copying our parents, right? Like that's how we actually all learn to communicate. So it's only natural that we pick up some bad habits along the way.
mm. And you were talking about sort of the communication model of sending and receiving. I suppose even sometimes when we receive, we might decode things in different ways to each other.
Oh, absolutely. Like, you know that saying, are we singing from the same hymn sheet? Are we on the same page? It's all the reality that what I hear and what you hear from the same person, we can walk away with two very different understandings. And we're not really in the habit, we've never picked up the habit, as humans, of checking back have
Yeah.
with what somebody has taken away from our conversation. And maybe it's sometimes we think it's rude, we think we might imply that they're not clever or not listening, and whatever the reason for it, I think most often than not it's that people don't have time. So it's I've sent an email, I'm assuming people have picked it up the way that I've intended it to be sent, to be taken up. Or if I've delivered a presentation, the questions at the end, if there are questions, that will tell me how much they've understood. But that's not really checking that they've got the same understanding, because a lot of
Mm,
us, right, you can tell me something and say, do you understand? And I think I understand, but whether that's the same as what you meant to share with me is a different story. So there's a lot in there about recognizing that communication, it seems easy because we just open our mouths and turn on our
yeah.
ears, but it's actually a lot more nuanced than we realize.
And I suppose that sometimes people might be reluctant to check for understanding. They might, worry that maybe they might sound less smart if they're checking, or they don't want to offend people to assume that they didn't understand.
Yeah.
Do you have some tips around what is a nice way of checking in, or some nice phrases that you might use to do that check in a little bit more easily?
And so there's the extreme version. There's one in the Navy, which is called check back command or something like that. So if I'm a sailor on a ship and my captain gives me an order, turn to starboard, the sailors actually have to repeat that back. So turning to starboard, sir. And that is there because of the importance, life and death. It's a big ship on the ocean or whatever. But that's a ritual within the military to confirm understanding. And in many cases, it's repeating the same words back with sir at the end of it.
Yes.
And now that doesn't work so well in the workplace. So, but what we can do if we're aware of it, and if it's something that we do intentionally, we can create it as a habit for ourselves and our teams. And where the usual part is, at the end, you go, did you get that? Is that clear? Do you have any
Mm.
questions? All of those are yes, no questions. So it activates the brain in a different way to open questions. So what I tend to ask is, what questions do you have?
Mm.
So that actually, it's not just a different way of saying the same words. It's that the receiver, it activates a different part of their brain that is, there's an assumption there that I have questions. Now, what might those questions be? Or it gives, the other option is to like, well, where do you think we should go from here?
Mm.
So asking that question after sharing information yourself gives you then a sense, they might not repeat back what they've heard, but at least the very next step that they've taken up from it shows you what level of comprehension, what information has come through, and it gives you a check on the context that they've understood it.
And it is kind of obvious when you think about it. When you said, did you understand? Of course, you're going to say yes, because in your head, you feel like you have the complete
Cool.
picture.
Yes,
Yeah.
you're like, I
Yeah.
understand my understanding of what you said.
I understand that. I understand. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
We talked about noise in the beginning, about the different types of noise that can get in between those two cans on the string.
Mm.
Tell me a little bit more about that. What kind of noise exists in the organization?
So the obvious one most of us think of is the physical noise, but thanks to noise cancelling headphones, we're no longer at the mercy of that as much. But I think actually that's one of the easiest ones to spot, if there's noise outside your window or around you in the workplace.
Yeah.
The less obvious signs are mental noise in terms of distractions, or the voices in our head that tells us we've got to buy a birthday present for someone on Friday when you're in the middle of a meeting. And the things, even the notifications that might pop up on our phone, is actually a form of the physical noise that, your phone buzzes in your pocket when you're reading an email. You take it out, you come back, and your
Mm.
attention has been interrupted. So your ability to take in the information has now changed. So you're not paying as much attention as you were before. And so we've got invisible noise in people's heads in terms of distractions. We've got physical noise. The biggest source of noise that I've found is actually around assumptions. So assuming that the receiver knows what you know, speaks the same jargon that you speak, or has the same interpretation of
Mm.
your jargon,
Right.
that they have the same communication style. Like they like to, if you like detail, well, they must like detail as well. May or may not be the case. And it assumes that they're equally informed. So if you and I were in a meeting, Bianca, and I called you afterwards, I'm assuming that you were listening in the meeting. And just because you were there doesn't mean you took away the same information that I did. But
Mm.
I'm basing my starting point, perhaps wrongly, on a position that I think you're at the same point. Assumption that you've got the same interest in the topic, or is just as passionate about me about what we're discussing. So all of these things,
Mm.
I'm assuming it's the same priority for you as it is for me. And many of us, we can smile and nod when we're receiving information, but it really may not be a priority for us, as much as it is for the other person. So there's a lot of that kind of assumptions that gets in the way and stops us from being able to send correctly or receive effectively.
So I guess it's similar in terms of biases. We receive certain parts of information, but then we fill in all the gaps in between
Yeah,
with, by the sounds of assumptions and our own narratives and biases and things
yeah,
coming into play.
yeah. And I think now, with the pace at which we work, and the modes in which we work. Like if you, when we used to all be say co-located, you would often misunderstand something, but overhearing others or having a water cooler
Mm.
conversation with someone would give you that aha moment that, oh, I got the wrong end of the stick. And you could possibly hide it. Like no one might ever know that you had misunderstood it. But now, with our meetings, with the pace, with the workload, all of that, with our locations, it's a lot more likely that we take an understanding of something and we carry on without those natural interruptions being there to just adjust us and get us back on course.
I really like that point actually because it reminds me of in Agile you have stand ups.
Yeah.
And I think those 15-minute conversations are actually one of those checkpoints to go, oh, was it you who was doing that? Or was I doing that? Or were we doing it to the color of green? Or was it lime? Or was it,
Yeah.
some coffee ground color? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So it's all those smaller conversations actually that can give us more of a calibrated understanding as opposed to siloed understanding.
Absolutely. And I think it's that we've now moved into a mode where communication happens with a really clear intent. I have an email, I have information to share, I'll put it in an email, I'll put it in a Slack channel, I'll schedule a meeting. But actually, the accidental communication is important, just as important,
Mm.
at catching people and being able to, yeah, make sure everyone's back on the bus and moving in the right direction.
Those informal types of communication, because a lot of hybrid working or virtual working is so reliant on those formal communication points that we're not doing those informal pieces. Do
Yeah.
you have any advice or thoughts around how people might do more of that or be able to do something equivalent to support that catching of things?
I think the what I've seen in some organizations so far that works is a permitted time for informality. So it might be that there is a drop-in session or co-working sessions that people are in where it's actually everyone's got their own thing that they're working on, but they're in the meeting together or in the session together. Or another approach is the ask me anything. It's like,
Mm.
don't come with an ask necessarily. It's not all the questions you've thought of in the middle of the night, but more of a, just have an open conversation, no purpose, no agenda. It's just, let's pick
Mhm.
this project and bounce around, what we think or what could happen. So very much going into the what if space, because that helps then to let people, as they're listening, they realize, I'm not on the same page, or if they think we should do this, then I think it's hard to move out of problem solving mode for
Yeah.
communication. That you think we only communicate or catch up when there's a problem to solve. So it's permitted, almost
Yeah.
creative time around the thing.
Yeah. I think in terms of agile, I really like how it's short cycles because those short cycles give us a chance to go, hey, this is what I've, built so far, or this is what we were thinking, or, can we have some feedback? So those checkpoints become more frequent as opposed to we've run at this for 6 months and we've just realized that it's not what, the stakeholders were after.
Correct. And what I like about it, Bianca, is we generally don't think about those iterations as being about communication. Well, we see it as a one way. Here's what I've
Yeah.
developed. Is that the right thing? Which is back to that closed question. But it's actually, are we still on the same page? Have you changed? Have we changed? Have we misinterpreted? Like
Mm.
it's very much keeping everybody on the same hymn sheet, um, as much as showing progress and development.
So that's a great call out that in sessions like a sprint review, the opportunity to go, what's changed in your world to a stakeholder? Has your priorities changed?
Yeah,
What's most important for you in the next 6 months? Helps to get that two-way communication more so than this is what we've built so far.
correct. Because in real life, it's very unlikely that aside from that sprint review, the stakeholder or the business owner will have scheduled a separate event to say, these are my priorities, they've changed now for the next 6 months. So
Mm.
your sprint review gives you a catch all opportunity for anything else that needs to be shared or update, like a reminder to
Yeah.
make sure everyone's doing the right thing.
Encouraging an ongoing dialogue, I suppose, as opposed to a one-off.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, I heard that businesses lose an average of this is a shocking number,
Mm.
$11,000 per employee per year due to poor
Yeah.
communication. What are the telltale signs of poor communication?
So it's interesting. When you talked about China at the beginning of my career, a lot of my experience of poor communication would be when you go to a foreign country on your holidays and they say something and you don't understand, and you kind of stand there going, do I move? Do I say yes? Do I say no? That kind of experience many of us have had. And in an organization, at work, in any workplace, I think you you can easily find them if you're looking for them, but it's also easy to miss them if you're busy with
In
everything
it.
else. Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
So often what I've seen over the years, different teams, doesn't matter what they do, you'll just see somebody that's sitting in a room, a meeting or a conversation, and their eyes start to glaze over after a while. They may or may not pull out their phone, they may or may not do something else on a piece of paper, but you might just see them look a little bit off to center,
Mm.
and off center, and just kind of go, they're not listening. Either they're listening, they're thinking about what they've heard, or they're in the process of zoning out. Now, some people do that naturally. It's their listening face. We all have our own listening faces, and it's different ways of processing information. But what I tend to look for is, somebody that's doing a lot of talking and there's no questions,
Yeah.
or there's a lot of questions about what they've already shared, which shows that either the audience isn't listening or they don't understand, so they can't keep up with the pace at which the speaker is sharing. And you can also like watch people at the end of an interaction as they leave. Are they leaving with a sense of purpose, with a sense of, oh yeah, that made sense? Or
Mm.
are they leaving with a, kind of eyebrows gone up, like, I don't know what that was about, or I don't know what I'm supposed to do? And even when you move to written communication, if you get radio silence and you've asked for action or you've asked a question, often at the end of our emails, then it's a sign it hasn't been read, or it hasn't been understood, or it hasn't been prioritized.
Mm.
So a team of poor communication, there's generally a lot of misunderstandings going on, or there's apathy towards the information that's been shared. So I like to do little test drops, like really simple things, but asking people for action or asking people to send me information, that kind of thing. When I start to work with a team, it's to really get a sense of how much they're taking up, of what I'm
Mm.
asking, and how much they understand.
And does that go back to some of those open questions, like, what stuck out for you in the session? What was your key takeaways?
Mm.
Those sorts of things as well.
Yep. And look, the language, even when you think about it day to day, person to person, we can get really formal, and it's especially in corporate environments around, and it almost sounds like a bit of a test. Like, what were the 3 points that you took out of that meeting? But
Yes,
I think,
careful. Yes.
I think a lot of the time, what you would realistically say to someone is, "What did you make of that?" Or "What did you
Mm.
think of it?" Like,
Great.
how did yeah, like that kind of thing of just, did that make sense to you? Where do you think that puts us now? Doesn't it, that was cool what we heard in that update. I think that's going to lead to some changes ahead, or something like that. So really just bringing it into what, so what, now what? The
Mm.
Then now what do we do based on what we've heard? And then that becomes something that you can use to measure what's gone in.
Nice. So, if we sort of look at that communication overall, what do we need to do to get right? So if we're on that sending side, I suppose to start there,
Mm.
what's
Mm.
important for us to get right?
A lot of I do use that framework in terms of figuring out what's broken, where the gaps are, and then how to fix it. So
Mm.
as a sender, I think the best thing that any of us can do is to become aware of our own communication style. So you've got, like, there's a framework, Herman Brain Dominance Instrument's quite helpful for this, because it talks about how people process information, and generally then that leads to how you share information with others. So there's four types: analytical, strategic, practical, and relational. So the analytical thinker, if I process information as an analytical thinker, I'm looking for the detail, looking for the evidence, the facts, I like finding numbers that will give me proof that something is true and I can believe it.
Mm.
If that's my preferred thinking style, then when I communicate with you, Bianca, or a team of people, then without awareness, I'm more likely you'll have facts for Africa, you'll have evidence, you'll have links to research and all of that. But you might be a strategic thinker who's looking for the big picture and the why. And if
Mm.
I give you lots and lots of detail, I'm making work for you, and I'm asking you to expend effort to trail through all the detail looking for the why, and then you won't find it at the end.
Mm.
And that makes you a very tired receiver. So you're unlikely to actually get my point or pick up the message because you've used mental energy trying to decipher my message.
Mm.
So I
That makes.
think understanding what are our tendencies, what are our natural preferences if I was to sit down and write a message, and then looking at your audience is the next best thing that you can do in terms of how do I then tailor what I'm sending, what I'm saying to the audience that I want to receive it.
Would it be fair to say then that, in some of those different styles of communication, it's also thinking about it's not just a one and done. You can't just like craft your email with a certain language and go, then that's done. It might be that you then have to follow up or do other parts. So communication, not just a one off. What's your sort of thoughts on that?
Oh, I absolutely agree. Like, depending on who you talk to or what sources you look at, it's like at least 3 times people need to receive the information.
Mm.
Some people say 7 times, and maybe there's others who say more. But at the very least, I think it's 3 times is for people to, on average, for people to really get that locked into their long term memory or enable the complex processing in our brain. And because there are exceptions if it's really bad news or really sudden news or a big surprise, but in the main, we're receiving information like just constantly on, and it mixes between work. 1 minute we're on our emails, the next minute there's a message on our phone, the next minute we're like a child walks into our home office, and then you've got meetings with people at work. So it's there's
Yeah.
just we're always filtering what's important, what's not important, what's important, what's not important, what do I need to work on, what do I need to act on, what do I need to leave until later. So if you think of our brains constantly making those decisions, then how we when we're sending an email to somebody, to anybody, then it's really important that we're cognizant of those kind of interferences that are
Mm.
there getting in the way, and preventing the message from getting through.
So I suppose as leaders, when you're crafting messages now, it's not about just that one delivery. It's like, okay, well, how am I going to do that 3 times? Or
Yeah.
what's the 3 ways I'm going to deliver that message?
Yeah. And
Mm.
I don't know for you, Bianca, like what you're seeing with, or how much you get, pre-read, or here's some information, we'll discuss it later. Sometimes there can be apathy about that because people feel, oh, well, nobody's going to read it, or they don't have time to read it before our
Mm.
conversation. And sometimes it's not about everybody reading it beforehand. It's that there is a resource that they could get information beforehand. And it might be you have your meeting and the person goes back to that because they say, something didn't make sense, or I want to look it up in more detail. That the TLDR, we all get the summary, too long, didn't read, get the summary at the top.
Mm. Yeah.
I don't know, 1 in 4 people will scroll down and look at all of the detail, and that's important for them to be able to take in what you're sharing. For the other 3/4 of the people, they won't need it, but at least there's a confidence that the information is there and available if they need it. So what I try to do is something in writing, something verbally, and if at all possible, an image or a diagram,
Mm.
because then that's tailoring to different people's thinking styles, how they like to receive, and how easy really it is for them to remember it in a week or 2 weeks. Because not everybody is a words person.
Yeah.
Not everybody will pick up the same thing when they're listening. So, including like your podcast already, there'll be people who've picked up different things, just because they're listening. So, if we have a picture, then they'll be listening and a picture and a visual. So again, you're trying to tap into two senses more than one. And it helps to make sure you're getting more hits across your audience, really.
Just sort of talking about that visual component, it used to be that if you wanted to do something a little bit more dynamic with your communication, you'd have to engage an artist to create a visual, or you might have to go to a video company to create a video. How do you see the introduction of AI sort of changing what we can do from a communication perspective and what that might mean for leaders?
So I think it's been fascinating watching the tools that can provide the visuals. I think we all figured out pretty quickly the word-based tools, but the visual ones have, it's like they've given this spark of innovation into what might show up on a screen. And usually the best thing about it is when people afterwards say that was generated by AI, because people haven't realized, it was that good that they might not have known it. And what I keep looking out for that part of, a picture that will connect on many levels with different people.
Yeah.
So it's not just your standard typical image of information portrayed in a graph, but a bit like those four communication styles, that one image can appeal to all four, which I think AI could very much get us to much quicker than what we might be able to do ourselves. So I see this huge opportunity to be even more visually, not necessarily appealing. Like what is pretty to one person is not necessarily to the next. But I think it hits the mark for more people in
Yeah.
one image. Or even that AI actually starts to suggest that, like, if your audience is mainly like these type of people or these type of thinkers, use this compared to if it's a different group, completely different group. So you compare, say, the finance team and the marketing team. If you want to share the same information and you want to put it in an image, then those two images, AI could help us to generate two different images that
Yeah.
land with your audience. Because actually, that's who is most important. It's not our personal preference as a sender. It's the people who we want to receive it and take it in.
Coming back then to those four different thinking styles that we were talking about, we talked about the analytical one. Could you give us a quick run through of the
Sure.
three others just to put that into our tool bank?
Yeah, absolutely. So analytical is the first. The second is strategic. So that's your big picture thinkers, very much often associated with early adopters. That if you give them information and it's all perfectly tied up with a bow and everything's been cleared and clarified, it almost bores them because they'd like to have a little bit of ingenuity or creativity that there's still a bit of mystery. Maybe we don't know, or that's just a draft. So I can then entertain it in my brain as to what finished might look like.
Mm.
The strategic thinkers are generally the people who will start their presentation with, or their communication with, the vision that we have as an organization or the vision for this project, reminding people of what the end game is and then giving them the update at whatever point along the journey they're at. Third group is practical thinkers. These are your sequential thinkers. So you give them some information. Their question is, okay, what steps did we take to get here? And what steps do we need to take from here on? It's almost like if they can't see that sequence of events, and it doesn't have to be detailed, but more of a where we started, where we're at, where we're going.
Yeah.
If they can't see that sequence, it's like a blue screen. It's like they just can't get their head around what you're trying to share. And they would use the sequential information as anchors to go, oh, okay, now I can see how it all fits together.
Mm.
I equate it to like giving somebody a load of jigsaw pieces and not the picture. So they don't actually know what they're building, and it takes a lot more effort.
It's like the four corners of the puzzle. Those are the steps that we need to start with to be
Yeah,
able to connect it all together.
correct. And then the last group is relational thinkers. And these are very much, it's like they're thinking about people, the impact on people, or the people who've been involved so far, opinions that have been fed into the information, perspectives. They're very much around that inclusivity, that we have considered all options and we've got different expertise that's fed into it. we've also considered what this information is going to mean for people in the future, how we're going to communicate with them, how we're going to manage change, all of that piece. So if you've got all four, if you've the perfect group of one of each in a team, then you've got all bases covered.
Mm.
And assuming they've all got psychological safety, they're all speaking up, they're all providing their way of thinking. And that really is about then covering, the communication, covering different perspectives on any project or program that you're working on. And if that is affecting change on others, if you've got all four styles well represented, then it's more
Mm.
likely to also cater to the needs or concerns or requirements of your audience.
And so taking a step back from the comms and looking at have you sort of got something for each of those areas is
Yeah,
really important. Or if you've got an audience that's got more of, one particular style, like
yeah,
the finance might be more in the analytical space, maybe.
yeah,
So making sure you're weighted towards that in your
yes.
communication.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Like we can very easily assume that there's a certain
Yeah.
type for each team. I recently did an exercise around these styles with a finance team, funnily enough, and what we found was there was a lot in the analytical group, but there was representation in the others, and
Mm.
it wasn't the minority. So maybe there was, half in the blue in the analytical corner, and then the other half were across the other three. And it made me think, how easy it is for me as a communicator with that team to think, oh, okay, my whole training, I'll load it up with facts and research and evidence and numbers. And that would appeal to half the group. But then what
Yeah.
about the other half? And it's not their fault that they're strategic thinkers. If anything, it's an asset to the team that they are thinking big picture
You need the
and
diversity of thought, don't you, anyway?
totally. And they become the why handbrake on. Hang on, while we've got all this detail, why are we doing this again? What's the vision? Where are we trying to get to?
Mm.
Same for the relational and the practical thinkers. So if I showed up only with analytical type information, I would disengage half the group.
Half of them. Mm.
And actually, it's that other half of the team who are critical for to make sure that everything is well represented and that the team is functioning at its best.
It sort of comes down then to, if you're the person who's sending it or the leader of a team, for example, is really getting to know each individual and treating your audience as a group of individuals, not as a kind of an unwashed whole that you kind of
Yeah.
make assumptions around.
Yes, yeah, and I think in some professions it's very easy, right? We go science, IT, finance. Surely they're all analytical because that's what they do, analytical work. But you
Yeah.
can be really good at analytical work and have a strategic thinking preference.
Yeah.
And like you say, it's the diversity of it. But also, there's so many new professions and roles now that actually the need to collaborate is much more prominent in terms of everyday working than just being able to decipher a spreadsheet or
Mm.
analyze a budget and things like that. That's your currency, but you've got to be able to use the other skills, the collaborative skills, to be able to make
Yeah.
something worthwhile or make something valuable with it.
There's much more of an ask on team members these days to do the integration with other team members in other departments, as opposed to perhaps in a more traditional sense where it was always the leadership responsibility to do all of that. You just did the pieces and it got integrated somewhere else.
Correct, correct. And I think that's a good thing that
Mm.
everyone individually now is in that position where it's expected, it's required. That's how we work, and that's how we get exposed to other disciplines, other people in our organizations. You're not waiting to get to a certain leadership position before you have almost permission to interact with other teams. So there's definitely a lot, more benefits to it.
Mm.
However, if we aren't aware of things like communication or how to connect with people who don't have the same background as us, don't have the same skill set from a technical perspective, then more often than not, we can end up just caught and
Mm.
stuck, wondering, how do I do this? And, how, how do these two disciplines fit together? How can we solve a problem? How can we make something new? And without the support, it can be quite frustrating for individuals.
My next question was going to be around leaders, but I think for a moment we should talk a little bit more on this idea of everyone being responsible for effective communication in the organization, because it's so integral to collaboration and co-creation, which, to your point, is more of an ask these days.
Mm.
What's your thoughts around how people go about building those skills beyond what we already sort of do today?
So I think I talked earlier about being aware of your communication style. I think there's also a piece on recognizing the role models of good communication in any workplace. Like, every leader is not necessarily a great communicator, and every graduate who comes into the workplace is not necessarily a poor communicator. There's people who have naturally good communication skills,
Yeah.
and observing. There's a book by Seth Godin that I read many years ago called The Linchpin, and it's all about these people who end up being like the glue between different people and different teams and organizations, but it's not an official role.
Yeah.
And I think in any workplace, you find people who are like these translators or interpreters or the messengers. Now, they're not necessarily the gossip merchants, but they're the people who will know. They just seem to, information gravitates towards them. They know what might be happening, or they'll have an insight as to what's going on in a team, what that team's working on, how that links up to things. So I think for people fresh into the workforce or looking to improve their communication, there's very much it's not just how well somebody writes an email or how well somebody presents, it's the informal communication loops that are happening, how networks are being built across the organization. We'll often think, well, who do you go to if you want to find out what's going on? It's not just going to them, it's watching how do they get, to be in that role of communication.
Yeah, great. I think Malcolm Gladwell talked about a similar concept called connectors, people
Yes.
who act in that kind of role.
Yeah,
Fab.
yeah. And it's never a role they're hard to do, but it is something that people just pass information around, or in a meeting even. If I don't understand something and I'll ask about it, there might be typical people who will often go, "Oh, I'll tell you what that is," or "I know what that's about" later,
Yeah, I
and
can
then we'll.
connect to yeah.
Correct.
Well, let's talk about leaders then. So leaders still have a critical role in terms of how they might amplify messages in an organization, or how they might support that filtering of the noises that we talked about earlier. What do you recommend that they can do so they can cut through noise and deliver more impact?
For leaders, I often challenge them on firstly understanding where things are getting lost. Um, a lot of times people talk about effective communication and they'll say, what are the tricks to effective communication? And I think, well, actually, start with what's tripping you up. Start with trying to figure out where the noise is. So what are the noises that are getting in the way of people between the senders and the receivers? And I that's where I suggest leaders that I've worked with is getting them to start. Like, where is it falling over? Is it a sending problem or is it a receiving problem? Is it a bit of both? So when you as a leader send out information, in your opinion, it's gone, people should receive it and they'll all know what it is. Are they reading it? Number one, if it's going out in an email, are they turning up to your meetings? Are they turning up to the presentation? Are they tuning in when you're sharing information? And then work on that first, because that's the first part of the process. Then look on the other end with the receiving. Are they taking away different information? What do they take away from an email, from a presentation, from a meeting, from a conversation? Where, how much opportunities do they have to discuss that with others, with their direct manager, or to put it into practice? So how relevant is it, and where are the natural rituals that picks up, "I'll remember that we heard that last week and now this is how
Yeah.
it's being played out." So it's like you've got to have little checks along the way in kind of formal or informal ways to be able to check what's coming through and where are people, do they not think it's important? Do they not think it's relevant to them and their role? So understanding what's getting lost and where it's getting broken. And from there, then address that area specifically.
So get a little more targeted. There's not a just one set playbook. If you do these things every single time, it's going to work
No,
perfectly,
no.
right?
And I
Yeah.
think sometimes we think, oh, it's jargon, that's the problem. Or, people aren't listening, people are too busy. It's very easy to blame it all on one thing without really lifting up the hood and going, right, information circulating. There's so much information everywhere. Why are people picking up the wrong information? Why are they not picking up information we do need them to pick up? Is it that they're afraid to ask questions? Is it that they assume they're all correct and
Mm.
they don't have an opportunity to cross check that understanding? Is it that they're not meeting enough, or in the rituals that they're having, like a stand up, that's not feeding through because it's seen as too high level or irrelevant? So really challenging the where is information getting stuck, and that helps you to be a lot quicker and more effective at unblocking it and starting to move forward.
If we're looking at communication effectiveness, it seems a bit hard to measure, to be able to go, how many of the messages were actually received and things like that.
Mm.
So how do you go about checking in? How do you sort of measure the effectiveness if you're like, okay, I know I need to diagnose some stuff, and we sort of talked about that side, but how do I kind of go, I was here and now I'm here?
So when I first started to look at measuring communication, I had the same kind of question. And then I realized that actually this used to be swap out the word communication for engagement, right? We
Mm,
used to believe that engagement wasn't measurable. We couldn't ever know if we had gone from here to here.
yeah.
And yet, look at our engagement surveys in so many organizations that we now go, actually, it's not spot on. It's not an exact, tangible measure, but we can now measure a sense of people feeling more engaged than they did last year.
Yeah.
Now, we haven't reached that promised land yet with communication in terms of surveys or assessments, but the way I look at it is that if you've got a lot of miscommunication happening, what does that mean for your team and their output or their productivity? And their engagement is one of those things as well. So, there's studies asking people how much does poor communication impact on your role, impact on your energy, excuse me, and and then likewise looking at the opposite. If a team has really good communication, what happens in that sphere? So they save more time because there's less time spent. They save time because there's less effort spent clearing up misunderstandings. They There's less waste. There's less duplicated effort. There's less.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought this is what
Rework.
we needed to do. Yeah, rework.
Yeah.
Because the checks have been there, and they've got this open communication or common language that means that they are we're always working towards the same output or the same goal. And I think when it comes to measuring it, it's when I've worked with clients in the past, at the start of any type of communication audit or communication training, I ask them to pick what's the biggest pain right now in terms of what's
Mm,
this causing. So it's like the secondary impact of poor communication. There was a client I worked with once whose team were customer facing software developers. They were really clever and good at what they did. But the problem was that they weren't communicating effectively with the customers. And mainly it was because they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. So what they did was say very little at all. So then they couldn't make things
say the
worse.
wrong thing. Mm,
And then the clients would be saying, well, look, we can see we're paying top dollar for these really clever software developers, but we don't know what they know because they don't open their mouths and we don't really hear from them. So it's hard
yeah.
to see that we're getting value for our money. And I asked the client, well, if they improve their communication, and they start to perform better and be better communicators, then what would change in your life? And he said, well, I won't get as many phone calls from the clients because they just escalated to me and asked me to explain what's happening. And about 3 weeks after we had finished the training, I called him and said, well, how many calls have you had? So actually it was really as specific as him looking, okay, in the week before the training, I had 5 calls. And 3 weeks after, I said, well, when's the last time you spoke to those clients? I mean, they can still have a relationship with you, but are they calling with that type of call? Are you getting pulled into escalations because of communication problems? So that's, to me, that's the easiest way to measure the impact of a change or an improvement in communication, is to see what is the knock-on effect on the team. And it may be that there's less of negative impact, or it can be there's more of positive, like less rework, more time, faster production, or faster reaching our outputs.
Yeah. And some of the delays on and things like cycle time could be reduced because we're able to push things through the system quicker, for
Correct.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it gets to the point of people sitting there twiddling their thumbs because they're communicating expertly. Like, it may be more of a, oh, we got to something else on the backlog, or we had more time to do testing, to do whatever we needed to do. We didn't have to have so much of a rush.
Yeah. And you would see some of that commentary coming through too in the retrospectives, where there's less challenges that may have come through miscommunication of some sort.
Yeah. Another part that it could also show up is, if you're doing a retrospective and there was a stressful moment, or something didn't go to plan and there was everyone, all hands on deck kind of thing, it's also under pressure where communication really becomes critical, because time's against you, everybody's under pressure, everyone's stressed. And if they've managed to get communication working or humming when they're out of stress, then under stress it can be faster decision making, less feelings hurt. Again, hard one to measure, but there's more of that feeling psychologically safe, that I could go and say, this is a problem, this is not working, without I'll just try and fix it or do something else. So it really creates that sense of openness and honesty, and a sense that everybody's, the messenger is never getting shot in the midst of whatever's happening.
Yeah. Fabulous. Yes, now we've come to the wrap of our session. There's so much more to go in terms of being able to hone our skills around this space. How do people find out more about you and your craft, and anything else you think would be good for people to be thinking about in these times?
There's a couple of different ways, Bianca. I'm on LinkedIn. I post as often as I can. I've got a weekly newsletter that people can sign up to on my website, eithnesweeney.com. And I also, from time to time will run podcasts or webinars, just keep up with what's out there. At our meetup that'll come up in a couple of weeks as well. Or just reach out to me on any of those channels, and I'd be happy to catch up and chat.
Fabulous. And always a good find to have somebody who role models brilliant communication yourself. So I look forward to seeing your newsletter myself, and all of the stuff that you can share with us. I'll put the links that you have to all of those things into the description for the podcast as well, for people who would like to connect with you more on that side. Thank you so much for your time today and your insights on the world of communication.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Bianca.